Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 15th of January 2025. This meeting is being broadcast live to the public via YouTube and will be available for viewing on the YouTube channel after the meeting. Just to remind everyone here, I think everyone is well aware of our peculiar speaker system, so make sure that the microphones are on, otherwise the cameras won't zoom in on you. But please do turn them off as soon as you stop speaking. We are not expecting a fire alarm, so if a fire alarm does go off, then please do leave the room promptly and head for the relevant fire exits and the stairs. We've had apologies from Mr. Trevor Pendleton. He's being replaced today by Mrs. Hilary Fryer, so thank you very much, Hilary, for joining us, and also welcome to our lead member for health, Mrs. Louise Richardson, and also Mr. Champion as well. So we're going to start the meeting now with the full items. Item 1, minutes of the last meeting, which was held on 13th of November 2024. Is everyone happy with those minutes? Can we take them as read?
Just the one amendment.
Oh, one amendment. That's right. I picked that up. So thank you very much. Or rather, I picked up from the minutes that the amendment was there. So we'll take that as the amendment, but otherwise passed. Okay, thank you very much. Item 2, question time. We haven't received any questions from the public. Item 3, questions asked under by members under Standing Order 7375. We haven't received any questions either. Item 4, to advise any other items as urgent to the chairman for elsewhere on the agenda. No items have been passed. Item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Betty, usual declaration? Okay, thank you. Any others? Brenda, okay, same as well. Anyone else? No? Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Item 6, declarations of party whip in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure Rule 16. I don't think we probably have any declarations. No. So item 7, presentation of petitions under Standing Orders 35. No petitions have been received. So we're on to the main 3 items of today's meeting. Item 8 covers the medium-term financial strategy for the coming year, 25-26, up to 28-29. Then we're on to item 9, which is the annual report of the Director of Public Health for the county area. And then item 10, which is the health performance update. So we'll start with item 8. As usual, we'll take all papers as read. So apart from, by all means, please give us a sort of a 60-second sort of focus or summary at the beginning, but otherwise we will go straight into the discussion on the paper. This particular paper, we are going to take questions under 4 different sections as usual. So I'll come to those once Mike Sandys has done a brief introduction. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you said, this paper sets out, provides, well, as paragraph 1 says, provides information on the proposed medium-term financial strategy as it relates to public health. We will split into questions as we go. I guess the first bit from me is that reminder that public health is funded differently from the rest of the authority. It's not funded through the general fund, through council tax, but is funded by way of a specific grant from the Department of Health and Social Care, which should be spent exclusively on public health activity in the fulfilment of the public health functions that we've got as a council. As always, we normally are in a position of having to come here as part of the MTFS process before we actually know what the grant is for next year. I don't know exactly when the grant's going to be announced, but I've heard it rumoured that it could be on Friday. So it's always a bit of a shame that we're doing a detail of what we spend it on before we know how much we've got. As Adrian, I know it's caused Adrian a few sleepless nights. We normally budget for the next year on an assumption that we might not get any uplift at all from central government. So we essentially budget for a flat cash. Given the pressures which are less about the NTFS, but more about pressures on the public health expenditure itself, things like agenda for change, pay changes, we initially assumed pragmatically that we were going to get a 2% increase in the public health grant this year, and then worked our figures on that basis. There is some sense, well, we know we've got additional money to cover at least some of the agenda for change pay rise as well. which is why we've quoted a figure of budgeting for a 3.2% increase. But again, that's slightly hypothetical. As I was saying to the chair earlier on, it's tempting to think, well, we thought we were going to get 2% and now they've put 1.2 in, but you don't know for certain what the 2% is. So it's almost like they're giving you the cream before they've told you what the cake is. So there is that uncertainty, which we'll just have to deal with in year. But essentially the paper sets out two bits. There is, as paragraph 7 sets out, an amount of money that we try and find from within the public health grant to help the overall position of the authority by spending it on eligible expenditure elsewhere in the council, which is its own tale. But that is very much against a background of dealing with our own cost pressures. We never ask for growth from the general fund because the first thing we have to do is to consume our own smoke and then move on from there. So hopefully the paper sets out what our contribution to the MTFS is, our expenditure against the public health functions that are the responsibility of the council, and then from paragraph 14 onwards sets out some of the specific public health pressures that we've had to work into our budget setting for this year. But I'll stop there and we'll crack on with questions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so we will now move to questions. We're going to take questions under the extra section paper that you've had for relevant to item 8. So we're going to take the questions first on relevant to service transformation and proposed revenue budget. These are paragraphs 5 to 10 and Appendix A, and that's on pages 11 to 13 and page 19. So can I see, first off, are there any questions in relation to that particular section? Right, I don't think there are. I'm waiting for some questions from Mike in particular, because I know he's got a couple of questions that he wants to ask. I'm anticipating precisely which section he's going to actually ask them under, but it's obviously not this one. It narrows down the options in that case. Okay, well, look, in that case, what we're going to do is move on to budget changes and adjustments and growth. Mike or Adrian, is there anything in addition that you actually want to say about that section before we take any questions on it?
If I can, Chair, just as Mike alluded to, after the paper was generated, we did receive additional funding into public health, specifically to support the payments that we need to give to the NHS for the pay award. The total additional allocation on top of our allocation for this year was 868,000. That pretty much covers our additional outgoings for this year, so the in-year costs. Thanks.
And then from me again, I suppose just to expand on what I was saying before. So, you know, as Adrian said, there is pressure on our budget. We've got additional money for that, but there remains pressure, but we deal with that. So in terms of growth as it relates to MTFS, none, because we just don't bother asking for any. We'll consume our own smoke. You'll see that there isn't an awful lot of kind of additional savings targets coming forward, but essentially that's because we've reached this figure of £2.7 million that we try and free up from the public health grant to then contribute to the MTFS. Clearly, you know, that's a good whack anyway. By budget, it's about 10%. So you can't really take two savings targets, if you know what I mean. You can have a growth-related efficiency target on the grant, and actually it's enough of a stretch to do that. So we haven't put any extra savings in because essentially that would amount to trying to run two separate sort of cuts, if you like, in one go. So, but we have, I think, delivered everything we need to in terms of the 2.7, which will then carry forward into future years.
Thank you very much. In that case, okay, Betty.
It is a bit worrying in terms of finance, in terms of how we're going to move forward in delivering the services. Has there been any work done in terms of the impact of this on the services that we are delivering to the public? What will we have to cut? What can we not deliver? It's just a general question.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Newton. It's a good question. You know, you'll have seen, well, you'll know the range of things that we've had to do over the last few years, particularly in relation to the most obvious example would be the homelessness service from last year, 2 years ago, whenever it was now. We always, as you know, we always seek efficiency in Our commission services, so those ones like the sexual health service, would be a good example where we all seek financial efficiency. We're going through recommissioning. We've got a new provider coming in April, responding to changes in the way that people access that service more online, which in itself has been a bit of a money saving, and also working with a new provider on a less consultant heavy workforce. So as you know, many examples over the years about redesigning services to make certain we're delivering a as good, if not better service for reduced cost. That's great. But we've also seen a sense that we haven't got the money to have kind of universal services for everybody and then commission or deliver separately top-up services as well. So homelessness would be a good one. We used to have a separate contract with Falcon, but now we've subsumed that within the First Contact Plus service and kind of tweak things around to take account of it. So you can kind of see the way our service model goes. Looking to the future, I don't want to say, well, this is what will go in this and then that will what will go. Adrian and Josh as two ADs, we've got underneath you two, everything that we deliver and commission either within public health or where we spend things outside the department has a score attached to it in terms of its efficiency. So you look at, you'd rank it by evidence of effectiveness. Is it effective on the individual? Does it have scale and scope in terms of numbers? So you end up prioritising those which have the biggest impact for the biggest number of people, which is, the right thing to do. If you were to look what was currently lower scoring, and it's not to say it's not without worth, we don't do anything that doesn't have worth, but clearly some have a bigger impact than others. The first thing that we would have to cut if we had to in the future, I'd have to say, would be the bits outside of the department. So there is something about protecting, as you would expect, expenditure on what are called the prescribed services, so things like sexual health service and the health check programme, the equivalent of mandatories. The terminology is slightly different. Then you've got those services that really make an impact on the big public health areas like smoking, obesity, physical activity. Tends to be the way that those scores work out. And then down the bottom is the everything else. So, without getting into detail, clearly if the grant didn't keep pace with inflation, which is likely, then, you pull the drawbridge up from the bottom up, and what would go would be our ability to help out the rest of the council.
Post-COVID, there are many people out there that are really still struggling. I'm sure you're aware of that, especially in one part of my patch in particular, that I've noticed they're still struggling and trying to get help. And it's very difficult going out there as a councillor, knowing that there's limited work that you can do on their behalf. It's just those vulnerable people I'm most worried about. Quite a lot of elderly people living in their homes in the little terrace streets that are very, very isolated, especially if I use Storey as an example, where there are lots of students, and then you get isolated older people who really are a bit lost at the moment. And I'm not quite sure what we can do about that, other than going around as councillors and knocking on doors as we do. But I am concerned about the isolation, especially of older people. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. You'll know very well in terms of the service mix that public health provides. One of the other things we've done over the year is build that what we still call the social model of public health. So having said about the prescribed functions and the core public health issues around lifestyle behaviour, you'll know full well services like First Contact Plus and local area coordination, which is, why do we deliver those? Because they're not just effective, but also belief in the best way of helping communities is to empower them to help themselves build that resilience and contact the vulnerable. So what do you see in Leicestershire in public health terms that you don't see elsewhere is the team of local area coordinators. I think we've still got the biggest team in the country, and that is that commitment to recognising that social determinants like isolation are really important to health. Yep. And mental health friendly places. So again, not to say that they're there forever and a day, but if you're looking at a commitment and principles that underpin the department, then you see that in action.
And Bessie, just for assistance, you just reminded me that we've got a paper coming to the next meeting on isolation. So good reference. Are there any, Hilary?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm looking at page 15, paragraph 24, where there's a review of...
You're ahead of us in that case. That's the next section.
Oh.
So paragraph 24
Oh,
comes under
okay,
section
I'll
3.
come back to that.
We'll bank you. I'm looking at Mike now to see whether he's actually going to come. Oh, he's going to come in. One of his 2 questions. Okay, it's trump card. Go for it, Mike.
I'm afraid they preempted me on one of them with the pay costs coming through. That was one of my questions about when that's implemented. Do we go ahead if we don't get it? That sort of thing. But you've answered the question. But the second one is on item 15, the health check programme. Clearly, there's some flexibility built into this because it's the risk of it overperforming against budget. Is that a bad thing?
Straight answer, no, it's not. There's no way of answering the question without stitching ourselves up on this one, is there? I mean, we should be providing at least the offer of a health check to everybody aged 40 to 74 once over 5 years. So you should be hitting 20% of that population a year. Over the years, we've reduced the budget because we've not been meeting that. And I say we collectively because it's delivered by GPs. We've got to the stage where we've probably cut that budget too much. And now GPs have actually piled in a bit more to put the numbers in. It's created that cost pressure. It's very difficult when it's a prescribed function, you've got the money to do it, to then kind of go, well, that's a bit of a problem, because the answer is, no, they're doing what they should do, and we just got to have to work it out from, it creates a pressure, we just have to suck it up and do it, because it is the right thing to do.
Fiona.
Thanks, Chair. I think from a Health Watch perspective, we would be very realistic to understand where the MTFS is taking public health. And that's no different to other authorities and the challenges that you face. Part of the issue, I think, from our perspective, and it's been touched on already, is the longer term impact of any change in the level of service or the type of service actually being delivered. So, for example, you talked about sexual health and health checks as mandatory. So I would not expect to hear anything changing from that perspective, apart from perhaps method of delivery. You've touched on that more online. But when you take the next level down, smoking, obesity and physical activity that you mentioned, any change in those projects would have a longer term underlying impact and a greater cost determinant further down the line to the authority and to the health service. So how can the authority and public health in particular assure Health Watch and the committee that that impact is being measured with some degree of accuracy? We understand it, and we are thinking about how we can address that kind of longer term impact by reducing services or changing the way it's actually delivered.
Yes, interesting question. So the first part for me, again, is that split between what's MTFS and what's public health. And in the previous questions, I said, if you know, the thing that would have to go first is our ability to help out the rest of council, because there is a specific public health grant there. So part of your question, or part of the answer from me is, you know, it's almost a kind of meta cabinet kind of MTFS conversation, isn't it, about the impacts that straightened budgets has on the rest of the council, which, you know, you'll be aware of in terms of social care services. From a public health point of view, yeah, I mean, again, I've set out what would go first, and that would be the rest of the stuff outside of the department. In terms of protecting services around lifestyle, so non-mandated, but they are core public health. I mean, there's a different kind of combination. Do we measure the impact? There's 2 ways of answering this. In my mind, I'm going to have to trot out the usual line of, actually, compared to a lot of other authorities, we hardly spend anything anyway on those areas because our grant is just less than others. It's the well-worn figure, isn't it? Nottingham City, £110 per head of population from the public health grant. Leicestershire, 37. Leicester City, 81. Derbyshire, 55. They, you know, they're imprinted on the back of my eyeballs every day because that's the challenge. But nonetheless, we do what we can. In terms of measuring the impact of those, that comes back to some of the stuff in the performance report later on. So if you do look at things like smoking prevalence, yeah, because we've got a fantastically good smoking cessation service, which has delivered, as I always say, it's been going for nearly 10 years now, but better outcomes on a third of the cost of what it was when we came over the NHS. The proof of the pudding is we still do have, I think, just looking at Adrian, lowest smoking prevalence of any authority in the East Midlands. So, you've got the public health outcomes framework to help us guide our investment as well. And if there was some way to answering your question, that I've answered all of it.
It's a difficult question and it requires a bit of a crystal ball, really. So if you change the way that the smoking cessation is delivered or have to reduce it because of the budget pressures, that will impact longer term in terms of people's health and their ability to carry it. And that's the issue that I think Healthwatch would like to understand how that's going to be monitored and addressed as time goes on. Thanks, Chair.
So I think that there's a few bits that we can add there. So we constantly are doing health impact assessments on our services. So that's not just looking at who's accessing the services now and making sure that we're supporting the right people through our services, but that's also looking at the future of the services and the future health of the people that are accessing them. So we are modelling that work constantly. I think the other thing to add is that although the lifestyle services are not officially mandated services, there is a list of services in the grant conditions that there is an expectation that public health delivers. So it would be very difficult for us to reduce those services or cut them altogether because we wouldn't be able to fulfil the wider elements of our grant conditions, and wholeheartedly believe in the services that we deliver and the impacts that they have for residents.
That reminds me, probably when we talk about mandated and statutory, the other way of looking at it is everything that public health does is mandatory, because the one statutory duty we do have is to take steps to improve the health and well-being of the population. It would be very difficult as Director of Public Health to say, actually, we don't need to do anything on smoking because it still is the single biggest cause of ill health, ill health and premature death. And that's what makes it mandatory, because it's suffused by an understanding of the needs of the population and what makes a difference to health. So you wouldn't cut that and go, we need to invest in, I'm not going to pick on an area because it'd be unfair, but pick on something really random and say that's a priority because the data and the evidence does not back up making it one. So the other part of the prioritisation, I guess, is an understanding of what works in terms of health improvement and the big issues like smoking, drinking, physical activity, obesity, etc., etc.
Louise, do you want to come in here and then we'll move on to the third section of
Yeah, no, it's fine. I was just, I'm in agreement with Fiona. I think, a lot of the time we're looking at MTFS through 4 years. Health benefits are often seen longer term. So that's one of the issues we have to balance that. But I also think that the department's been very good at moving, for example, the smoking cessation to more digital, and that's worked very well, and there are other areas where we've done that. But I think we are getting to a point that if the grant doesn't keep up with things, we are going to have to start looking at preserving those things that we really should be preserving, and as Mike says, pulling back from outside the department.
Thank you. That probably takes us quite neatly on to section 3, which is savings and savings under development. Obviously, I think much of this has actually been covered in sort of comments in previous sections. Is there anything else anyone wants to, between Adrian and Mike, want to add before I come on to Hilary, because she had a question on this section? No, in that case, I'm going to go to Hilary.
Oh, am I? Oh, sorry about that. Yes, I was just looking at paragraph 24 on page 15, where the review of the SAFA contract. People who know me know I have a particular interest in the armed forces, and it says that the contract's ending in March this year, and it's being reviewed. Does that mean it's going to read that the contract is likely to be renewed, or is it in the process of being looked at, or is there going to be a gap between the ending of this contract and the possible commencement of another contract with SAFA? SAFA and anything to do with the forces at times gets sometimes not intentionally but put on the back burner, but it is not always at the front of everybody's minds, but it's still very important. So I'd just like a bit of clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, so where we are is that contract is being reviewed currently, so no decisions have been made around that. There's a huge amount of information to go through because we need to look at levels of referral, outcomes, etc. On first look, it's not looking great, if I'm being honest, and that is one of the contracts that are being put into the pot to look at what we do next, whether that is a recommission out to the market or whether that is a cut for public health.
I'm not certain we put it in there, but I mean, it's not the biggest contract in the world. I think it's only 10 grand, isn't it? So again, as Adrian said, we need to go through looking at the activity. Would we be better off thinking about what I was saying about if you took our own services like local area coordination and then said, actually, what is it we're doing about the veteran population, about the serving armed forces population that we can do in-house? Would that be a better use of the money? I think that's one of the options we need to consider.
Dan.
My declarations, I'm chairman of the Royal British Legion in the town of Ashby-Delazouchen area, but I have an insight into the work that goes on. There are various organisations, but they are imperative because they're dealing with lots of people who've represented this country, and where they're injured, it's because of actions on behalf of this country. So I would hope we can. I hear it's a small, not a huge sum, but it is important because when you talk to some of these people, the feelings of being on their own and desperation and loneliness, there's a whole range of things, because some injuries can cause problems within families that they suddenly don't know or recognise this person that went out with a kiss on the cheek and come back in tatters and mental illness and everything else. So if it is a small amount, please consider it carefully because it is really important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. If I go first and Adrian comes in. I mean, it, again, sort of would draw a difference between support for the armed forces and veteran population and who does it. More broadly, again, not picking on SAFA, but they are a small organisation. RBL, as you were saying, is somewhat bigger. I think even within that, there's other interesting things for me, which is, I mean, you know, veterans get older. I know it's fairly obvious, but actually, you know, if you look at the age profile of veterans and who they get involved with, I mean, I know from some of the remembrance days, you know, the RBL ones are getting older in favour of maybe younger veterans more being participating in Help for Heroes and the rest of it. So I think we do need to also consider capacity and demographics, if you like, of the various armed forces organisations, because it is changing as life moves on.
Yeah, I just wanted to reassure you that we are going to still continue working with veterans. I think part of the review is looking at what we're doing internally with our other services and how whether that's more beneficial or not to the money that we're spending on SAFA. We work really closely with the Royal British Legion through First Contact, and we work with hundreds of veterans doing referrals and reviews with them. I think what we're starting to find, and I don't want to preempt the review, but I think what we're starting to find, as Mark has already said, is that the community teams that we've got on the ground are working directly one-to-one with veterans, and actually what they're doing is enabling a level of support that we're not seeing through the SAFA contract because we're dealing with it directly. So it's about where that money is best spent moving forward, and that's really what the review is about. But just wanted to confirm that we're not wanting to work with veterans. We're just looking at how we can work with them to best meet their needs.
Thank you. I'm going to take Louise and then Fiona.
Yeah, I think Adrian's more or less said what I was going to say, in that we're not just saying we don't want to assist, you know, soldiers or, you know, forces, but is there a different way we can help them? The same way as we had to tackle the homelessness contract, and we've found ways of being able to do that in a much better and more cohesive way with the districts, etc. So it won't be that they will be totally ignored or anything. I wouldn't like that.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm going to have to make a declaration here because I'm a trustee for the Royal Air Forces Association and I'm also their lead welfare trustee. So we have a huge amount of work in the field of dealing with armed forces personnel, particularly from the Royal Air Force. So talking about the veterans, obviously there are the working age veterans and older veterans, both of which have needs, but different needs. We're right in the middle of undertaking our latest update in terms of what those needs actually are and identifying them. But what I would say is that my experience of working in this field is that the veteran community is quite a tight-knit community. They really enjoy working with people who have a similar background or understand the issues from their perspective. And also the military charities as a whole have a range, access to a wider range of grants and funds than local authorities might actually be aware of. And that's despite the local area coordinators working to good ability. That's instantly recognised. But of course, the military charities do have ways and means of their own. What I would say is that SAFA has a really good reputation, as the RBL, as the Air Force and the Association and the Ben Fund do. There are a whole range of charities out there that can support the work being done with veterans, whether it's in a single contract or whether it's in collaboration. And the opportunities are there for the authority to explore that further, as opposed to just thinking that we have a contract or we deal with it in-house. Cheers.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you for those points in particular. If we're ready to move on to the final section, I can see Mike getting ready for his final question. So we're on to paragraphs 26, 29. These are in relation to external influencers and other funding sources, particularly paragraph 29, which unusually for tables presented to us is 100% green. So I think all of us probably spotted that one. So are there any other points that Adrian or Mike would like to add into this small section at the end before we go on to any questions?
Only in relation to 28, you know, as I say, we won't know what the grant looks like for next year until we know. For many years, there was talk about public health funding being funded by business rates. That seems to have gone quiet. There's obviously a lot of turbulence in the system. NHS 10-year plan. Rachel Reeves, will there be a mini budget in March? I'm reminded that the ring fence around NHS it relates to NHS expenditure, not DHSC expenditure, which hopefully would mean that if there was anything happened with the public health budget, it's one of those ones. It doesn't matter what I do, I can't give a cast iron guarantee that what's set out in front of you is what will come to pass. But you know,
Ground cells, unknown unknowns, etc. Okay, right. Mike, do you want to come in with your question, or were you just feigning that potential question at the end?
I've done two already. I don't want to push the envelope.
Okay, that's fine. You're very generous. I think we should have a rule for everyone on 2 questions and no more per meeting. Okay, so look, there are no other questions in that case. Thank you very much, Mike, on that one, and also Adrian in particular. You know, we understand where you are. It would have been lovely if this Friday was actually last Friday and we actually had a complete picture for this paper. We will be on tenterhooks, no doubt, on Friday when the email finally comes out to let us know what the final award was. Let's hope, fingers crossed, that it is where you think it is, and then at least that gives us a little bit of certainty. Your comment about 10-year plans, I think every single department at the moment is producing 10-year plans, which ironically seems to be heroic, given the fact that everything else seems to be operating on 3 or 4 or 6 month cycles. So we shall see what happens. We shall see what happens. Okay, well, look, let's move on in that case. We are going to move on now to item 9, which is the annual report of the Director of Public Health, particularly focusing on inequalities in health. So this report is available from page 23 onwards in your agenda pack. Mike, if you want to do a brief introduction, I know this is our sort of second reincarnation of the annual report. And I have to say, having read through it, as I'm sure everyone else did, a huge quantity of data and lots to pause and think about. Some of that will probably be reflected in questions to you, but I suspect probably useful for the year ahead, if nothing else, for understanding maybe the context of some of the other papers that you'll be bringing forward over the next 12 months. But over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you were saying, as committee might remember, I sort of had a bit of a hiatus with my annual reports during COVID, but got back into the routine last year by doing a broad overview based on the health and wellbeing dashboard of the areas that we needed to make progress on, if you like, where I think come back to your question earlier, Fiona, we know where public health indicators weren't necessarily as good as they could be given the general health of Leicestershire's population, which essentially was physical activity and diet. I did say last year that this year I wanted to dive in a bit more detail and look at inequalities in health. I have shamelessly gone and nicked and lifted the existing Joint Strategic Needs Assessment chapter on health inequalities that was published in 2023, slimmed it down a bit and updated the information in it where I can. Although really the main point is to flag the groups, which is set out in paragraph 14 of the cover paper, in terms of where evidence and knowledge of the local picture would suggest that these are the groups within Leicestershire that face the most pronounced inequalities in their health. The ones highlighted in bold are the ones that almost make as big a difference to the whole population. So it's not just impact on the individual, but then scaling it up for impact on numbers. As you say, it's data heavy, so hopefully interesting and not too heavy a read. Purposes for doing so, from my point of view, thought the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment chapter, when it was presented to Health and Wellbeing Board last year, the year before now, went down really well, but there's no harm in kind of amplifying the messages in there and reminding our partner organisations and ourselves about exactly where inequalities lie within Leicestershire. I think particularly in the context of working with the health service at the LLR footprint, understandably, I think there's always a focus on the poor health in the city and the role of deprivation within that. And I'm not saying it's not important, but sometimes it can be difficult for specific issues in Leicestershire to get a voice within that. So I would like to use the annual report as a vehicle just to make certain people are aware across the broader system of our particular inequalities groups. I've put something in there in 16 about geography, but actually I'd sort of more prefer the groups in 14 because, and I was going to say this anyway, and it's not a point about anything that may or may not have come out last week. It doesn't really matter what your organisational boundaries are, doesn't matter where you live within Leicestershire. These are the groups of people that experience inequalities, and we do need to make certain that we do our best to mitigate those inequalities. So I certainly want to have that kind of awareness raising conversation with our stakeholder organisations. There's obviously a deal of work that I want to do with my own department, because coming back to the previous conversation, I can say, well, we haven't got the money for specific groups, homeless being one, but we need to then, but we're going to mitigate it by making our universal service kind of bend to the needs of these groups. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating, really. So I do want to take this annual report and challenge my own department to kind of say, well, go on then, within that context of universal services, what are we doing for people with severe mental illness? It is, and it's not to say, and that's not by kind of what we're doing for them, but taking the example, Fiona, about smoking, it's almost like, well, within the smoking service, what are we doing to make certain we're reaching out to people with learning disability, to people with a serious mental illness? It's that way around. Take the universal services and then think about these groups. So I haven't necessarily put the most hard-hitting recommendations in there, but I want it to be a kind of amplification, restatement, and then kick off, if you like, a challenge to partners and myself about, so what are we doing with our service provision that takes account of the needs of these populations? But I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. Bessie, do you want to put your speaker on?
I just want to touch a bit on the inequalities of health. Quite often these are often hidden. I mean, I'll use just my own patch as an example. I have a terrace, an area where terrace houses a mixture of students and older people living on their own. And quite often when you go and knock on doors, I do street surgeries, one of the biggest issues comes up is isolation. people are lonely and they are not very good about knowing where to go to get support and help and how to reach out. I don't know what we can do to help more than what we do, but there are so many individuals out there living on their own who really don't know where to go for help and support. Is there anything more we could do? Thank you.
I think, as you were saying, we got it coming up, a forthcoming item. I mean, don't want to get ahead of it, as obviously we talked about the services we've got, local area coordination, first contact plus, there'll be a deal of work, mental health friendly places. Pardon me, the work that Mrs. Richards will be involved in terms of the mental health subgroup of the Health and Wellbeing Board and the Health and the Health and Wellbeing Board itself, all of which we can go over in detail. I guess the issue for me with this one is a bit like when we say in the report, poverty is a thing which makes inequalities in health worse, but then these groups experience it on top of that. And I think the answer is maybe one of the things to revisit at the isolation bit is the same thing. Yeah, we normally talk about isolation as relating to older people, which is very fair. But it'd be interesting then to dig into, well, yeah, but what about isolation if you do have learning disability? What if you know, all the groups are listed down there? And are we doing anything either specifically or as part of our universal provision to then think about isolation plus this group probably equals a worse place to be in than if you were just isolated? But so I haven't got an answer, but I think that's one of the things to explore. Again, the purpose of the report really is to kind of get people to think about those groups on top of the existing problems that they've got.
It just brought back to me to say I do a lot of street searches, I do a lot of door knocking, and it was one old man in particular, and I never forget what he said to me. I suffer from the most common disease in the world. And I says, what was that, Jimmy? He says, loneliness. And I didn't even know how to answer him. Very, very hard. There, but he had, but the problem was it was a student accommodation nearby, which didn't help. But it's often those old people living on their own who don't know how to reach out for help.
And I may as well pick up a discussion we're having about student populations. I know Mr. Hunt raised it in an email with me as well, and to you and to. And I think it's a good point that you make, because, you know, obviously some of the geographic areas that I've flagged are ones that you recognise having a high student population. And some of the stats kind of strip that out, if you like, because the census data will remove those students who, you know, still got their home address as their kind of primary address. So. And when we use health data and we have a standardized population, again, it kind of adjusts for it. So you can try and mitigate, if you like, the effect of what the student population might mean in terms of the figures. But coming back to your example, then it doesn't take away the fact that you could be living in an area where if 2/3 of the population are students, what's left will be masked because they're just, you know, they become smaller numbers. They almost get a little bit hidden in the context of that. So I think that's less about the numbers, more again, you know, you'll know from an elected member point of view, you know, it's kind of like you see what that means. You know, real life experience sometimes doesn't match what the figures tell you. But anyway.
Thank you very much. Ross.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a more general question, thinking laterally about this report and how it relates to healthcare inequalities in our area. I think over the last few years, we've had quite a few relatively big changes, things like COVID. Last year we had flooding, and we were told it's once in a generation event, and then 12 months later it's happened again. You know, cost of living crisis. And whilst they're not directly related to public health, they obviously will have a knock-on effect. And I was at a parish council meeting last week, and one lady in my village flooded last year. She had moved back in November, and then she flooded again a couple of weeks ago. And the clerk in the parish council said she's having a nervous breakdown. And then I think last week we got an email about mental health support for people that have experienced flooding. Very, very timely. So I guess my question is how dynamic can we be as a department to respond to these big changes that happen in our community? Because ultimately I'd presume that these have a greater knock-on effect to those that are affected by healthcare inequalities. You know, those on low incomes, those unemployed without a job.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that one. Can we be dynamic? I think it is a really good question. As to nature, I mean, I suppose what I'm thinking is the nature of public health data is it's robust. and it's probably more robust data than a lot of other areas. The downside is it tends to rely on kind of annual data that's collected nationally, and to make it valid, you have to look at the rolling 3-year average. I guess in terms of kind of reflecting the needs of communities that are affected by issues in the here and now, that's more about the working groups that we've got. So I'm sort of more thinking things like mental health subgroup. I don't know if you want to sort of chip in with these, which would pick that up. I probably do need to sort of challenge ourselves to think about, have we got data which would then track that through the next years? Because it was almost like, if you think about the flooding, the recovery group will be thinking about, like, the mental health support, what do we need for those people and do for those people that are flooded? Have we got a mechanism to then say, actually, we need to think about groups of people who are going to be at risk of flooding or flooded, because actually there might be a long-term impact on their mental health, which then puts them into one of these categories? That's a good point. So I can deal with the short term, I can deal with the long term. I can't quite square the two at the moment.
I think obviously where the Resilience Forum comes in, it has the immediate phase, and then it has the recovery phase. And I would hope from the Resilience Forum they pick up on where things are needed to be at what time. I think going forward, for example, LPT put out the mental health and flooding. I think we've got to be aware of what everybody else is doing and make sure we're indicating to people where to go. I think a lot of it is communication, and when you're in those serious situations of flooding or COVID or whatever, the immediate urgent stuff gets done, and then you've got to think about what you could put in place after the event for if it happened again. And I think that's perhaps where we need that challenge within the subgroups, probably. But yeah, it's good question.
Fiona, and then Mike.
Thanks. I think from a Healthwatch perspective, having an annual report such as this is absolutely excellent. It provides a real knowledge base on which to think about things that are important within our communities. A couple of things stand out from a Healthwatch perspective. One is perhaps our ability to involve the people in those communities that you've highlighted in the report in the actual report, and thinking about the impact of what you've put in the report and how to help you take it further forward. So I think having access to people in those communities would really help design services or ideas and thoughts that are actually relevant to those people, and perhaps would have a greater impact than us sitting around a table at a subgroup deciding what might be a good idea. And we talked about different communities, and one of the things that I think good public health is about is giving back communities resilience and the ability to influence their own elements, whatever that might be. I'm not talking about the flooding because that's a little bit out of areas of influence. But in general speaking, giving people back the ability to take charge and control of stuff that's going on, involving them within their community, is one of the basics of good well-being. And maybe there's an element by involving the communities you've identified in the report and taking it forward, maybe we can think about how to build that resilience in at the same time in terms of this particular report. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that will be really helpful. I mean, you're right. I think it's not just about, if the starting point is raising awareness of the groups, actually then working with people to go, well, what are you doing? I mean, it comes back to that bit about what you're then doing in relation to these groups. And some of that is messages to share with partners along the lines of, recognise these groups. I wrote down equality impact assessments because, of course, we're probably all well versed in doing an EIA, but that only looks at those, categorised as having a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act 2005, whatever it is. It's not quite the same as kind of going from a health point of view. We've had a look at this, and these are the ones that you need to be reaching out to, engaging in your service delivery and design, etc., etc. Whether that's just the role of public health, but almost want to then kick off a joint conversation with commissioners of service, be they within the county council or district colleagues, and or indeed the NHS, just to do that. So the starting point for me is getting people to recognise these groups as being ones which are important to health, because I do feel we did say this in the JSNA. I'm not quite certain that the message really sank home, but certainly, I mean, I think Health Watch have got part to play alongside me in that one as well. So I'll probably throw it back at you, Fiona, and go, actually, it'd be really good if we could do some work on that one and, you know, see about publicising this within Leicestershire more as well.
I think that Health Watch would certainly look to work with public health to try and drive some of this stuff forward. That, no problem at all. I get the fact that there's a lot of work done within communities, particularly by the people sat around this table who have access to specific communities, and it's really helpful to take that message out and try and identify ways of building that resilience in, because when we're talking about health and well-being, having some element of resilience is actually one of the basic building blocks. So yeah, I'm happy to talk it through, however. Thanks.
Louise, and then we'll go on to Mike.
Yeah, I'm pleased you've brought up the resilience, because I think the more resilience we have within our communities and within people themselves to keep themselves healthier longer, the more it you know, helps everybody in the health service.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, like I said this morning at the briefing, I've been a county councillor for 20 years now, and parts of Wigston have always had an area of deprivation. I can't speak for Loughborough, although they're highlighted in here. And we've identified who the groups, the vulnerable groups are, but year after year, very little changes. And as much as we highlight it and try to get better outcomes for these groups and people, depressingly, things don't change a great deal. And as much work as you and your team put in, Mike, highlighting the issues and speaking to the other agencies and authorities saying, look, these people need support, need better signposting, whatever it be, better support work. But I mean, these groups highlighted under section 14, it covers millions of people, probably tens of millions of people, and multi issues for each individual, probably. I just wonder, taking it forward, do we ask them what their issues are? I mean, all right, you're a homeless person, difficult to engage with, I get that. But LGBT, why aren't we asking those individuals, what are your issues about getting better health? I mean, it's not all about poverty, surely. There are issues that cross over, and I just wonder, going forward, a better understanding of these groups. I mean, carers, that covers millions of people. It's a big ask, I know, but I'd like, before my time comes to an end, to see something a little better. But I remain pessimistic, sorry.
I'll go first this time. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's a really complex issue, and every single one of those people will have a different complex need, and so it's very hard to design programs that will fit every single person to their group. So we've got to look at the data and try and provide the best possible across that. But it is difficult. Mike and his team got a dreadfully difficult job to do.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess like everybody, we all come into a position wanting to make everything all right for everybody, and then you realise it's quite a difficult task, and you settle for doing what you can. But I don't have to tell you that because you're an elected member. Feels like very similar, I would imagine, as to why you get involved and then what the day job is, you know. To split it down and more seriously, yes, I think it is a challenge. I think it was Mrs. Newton, what you were saying, in terms of actually using this as a vehicle to then maybe have a conversation through Health Watch, through our organisations, about, well, what are you doing to engage and seek the views of these groups? That's probably one of the main things to take forward in terms of recommendations, because again, some of these groups, I'm sure people would go, yeah, we do loads. Carers might be one, LGBT community might be another one. But I'm sure there are, I'm sure there's people in those communities who go, no, you don't listen to us. And there'll be other groups within that list where they go like, no, you've never listened to us. So again, I think it's worthwhile just flagging it. I think within that conversation then, and coming back to that kind of, do we make a difference? Well, jokes apart, you do what you do. There's clearly some things around broader international, national economic changes, societal changes, social mores, which are outside the scope of what I can do and what we can do as a council and what anybody can do within Leicestershire. But it's definitely worthwhile having that conversation in relation to, say, individual services. So I'm aware of the piece of work, as I was mentioning earlier on, that we've done, Adults and Communities colleagues have done around increasing the uptake of health checks for those with a learning disability. There is work that we've done certainly around kind of sex workers, working through our sexual health service, engaging with street sex workers as well. So I think it's probably, for me, it's a really worthwhile conversation to have to involve those groups and communities. I'm always wary of promising the earth though, and it just comes back to being clear about what we can affect and make a small local change, which will make things a bit better whilst recognising there's things that we can't. So, and I guess that's what keeps us all going, really. Otherwise, she would give up.
Okay, look, I've got 3 questions left over, and that's it for this item. So, Mike, you want to come back on a further point. Betty wants to come in for a quick point, and then we'll finish with Fiona, and then we'll move on to the next item, if that's okay. So, Mike.
Yeah, just briefly, that conversation would be really useful. Better understanding of what the situation is for many of these groups. I suppose the danger at the end of it is we find out some of what the requirements are, but then we're unable to deliver. And then you build up people's expectations. Actually, we now understand what your particular issue is, but we can't do anything about it. And that would be very depressing.
A depressing note. Betty, hopefully cheer us up.
A lot of street work, so I get it right and I talk to people a lot. But one of the things is people don't always know where to go to ask for help. And I just wondered if there's something, an article that could be put in maybe in Leicestershire Matters, it goes through every door, about these are the areas, these are the numbers or email address. Something as simple as that may help. I don't know, but
I can remember seeing lists of numbers, etc., in Leicestershire Matters not that long ago. But having said that, hopefully we can take a note of that and make sure that there's a regular sort of churn. I'm pretty sure we've had content on that basis. Okay.
Yes, we do, but again, I can always liaise with comms colleagues just to make certain we keep on banging it out there. Yeah.
It's one of those things that your eyes almost have to sort of bleed before you actually something goes in. I can't remember what the terminology is, but Fiona.
Thank you. Just to make colleagues aware that Healthwatch do carry out research. We meet with various community groups and talk to them about their issues and the difficulties they're facing. And for example, I've just pulled one up out at random. In August of last year, we published an insight report into experience of health and social care services in both the city and the county for the LGBTQ+ community. So the information is out there. To tell us exactly what the issues are from their perspective. You'll be pleased to know that the majority of them had really good experiences, but then there were some that didn't, and the information and the evidence is there to say why they thought they didn't experience good. And they're not the only group. We've visited a number of different community groups over the years, and their reports are all available online. And this is where, working with public health, if public health wish to commission some extra work in particular communities, happy to help. But the information is there on our website. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to move on to the next item at this point. Thank you very much to Mike for this report. As I said at the beginning, and I think probably echoed by many of the comments through the discussion, there's a huge amount in this annual report. I think it's great that you're actually being able to actually start the process again, and this one obviously builds on last year's as well. There's a huge amount of data in there. There's a lot of stuff that I know will be relevant for the coming year. There's obviously linkages, as Fiona has mentioned, to additional work elsewhere around the county area. And I know, from talking to Louise and talking to you, the sort of passion to move things forward. I absolutely take Mike's point, but we have to keep on moving forward because even if the progress sometimes feels minuscule, it's still progress, and that's the key. So look, thank you very much for that. We're now going to move on to item 10, which is the health performance updates. I hope coming over to the front now, we've got David Baxter from the Integrated Care Board, and also County's own Andy Brown from our business intelligence team. So, as usual, we've taken the paper as read. There's a huge amount of data in there. I know, and as always, everyone's had a chance to go through it, pick out relevant bits that I know will be of interest to them, but also additional questions as well. One of the questions that I asked earlier today, and I think I'll probably start off by actually asking that, and then you can build it into your introductory comments on the piece, which actually two points, and I know these are points that get asked, I think, probably every single year. One is actually the data as comparative data to other areas adjacent to the county and city, so we can get an idea how Northamptonshire is performing against those criteria, or Nottinghamshire, etc. Because otherwise, what we're doing is looking at the data in historical terms, whether it's what happened last year or previous year, or possibly what might be coming up over the next year. But what we're not getting is a feel for how this data sits in our geographical area. And obviously, a lot of our residents do choose to go to other areas for treatment, particularly those who live on the periphery of the county. And the second, which is a question I think I've asked previously, which is the why on some of this performance data, asking the question about, argument's sake, I'm not even going to pick an example, but a particular item, why is that particular performance data, why is that important? Because I suspect that probably there are other ways of measuring outcomes and getting an idea about how things are actually moving forward, how good the service is, is it achieving its core objectives on health, etc. So if I can ask you to build those in to sort of a couple of minutes introduction, but I said we're taking it as read, so we'll go straight into the detail. But if you want to tease out anything in particular that you think is important on this paper for this year, then that would be great. Over to Andy to start off with.
Yes, just a few comments in introduction to try and pick up some of those points. The report before you today, it's the sort of the overview report that you get, looking at three key areas really. The first part with most of the paperwork and most of the information to do with the NHS ICB, NHS priorities and planning system. So a lot of the performance information there is built around that national and locally agreed annual plan with the NHS, setting out the wider set of priorities. So this is a similar report that goes into the ICB processes, and I'm sure David will say a little bit more about that when it comes to David's section. So you've got that particular point. And towards the end of the report, the benchmarking at the moment for the ICBs around other ICBs, I think there's about 40 other ICBs nationally. So you'll see at the end of the report, there is some sort of top 25% rating for Leicestershire against other ICBs, and also the bottom 25%. So trying to tease out that comparative position, accepting it doesn't talk about sort of Nottinghamshire, other areas particularly, but it is the national picture. So it does give you a bit of a guide about what's going well, what's not going so well. Similarly, in the second section, which is the public health outcomes framework section, with a key set of indicators that tie very much with the departmental interventions and the service plan that you've heard about earlier on, and the budget. So there's a subset of indicators there, and that looks at both the national position, so the sort of RAG ratings gets the national position, but also you'll see in there there's a nearest neighbour section. So I think it's about 17 nearest neighbours, and that's recently changed. The government's changed the way that's measured, or the NHS has, and that's really the ones that help us narrow in against authorities with very similar demographics. So if we're bottoming that, it's perhaps something we need to be worrying about, because there's not any sort of demographic, sort of geographical issues that would explain that. So we've got both of those in, and we also look at the county positions with the department. So we look at all county councils, which again is a decent benchmark given the sort of the scale of those areas. We could potentially look to bring some more sort of local East Midlands comparatives within that, but I think the nearest neighbours probably give you a better set to aim at, because most of them are in there anyway. So I think by looking at those, you're probably giving you the best picture to compare against.
Periphery of the county in particular, a lot of our residents will actually have a choice if they live, for instance, in North Jarnwood, about being treated in Nottinghamshire. Likewise, if you're in Hinckley, you'll probably look at Staffs or the Coventry area, etc. And it's just having a little bit of a feel for, probably 20% of our population who actually will probably choose to go out of county for treatment.
Okay, we'll certainly note that point, and David's here, and David's colleagues pull that together, so it's some sort of food for thought that they could have a look at that. And the third part of the report is the Better Care Fund performance round, which are just 4 metrics that seem to be going pretty well this year. Halfway through the year, it looks like 3 of those are on track and 1 just slightly off track. So that's the report. I'll just stand over to David to see whether he wants to pull out any particular points. I think it might be David's first meeting, so welcome to David. David leads performance, contracting and commissioning in the ICB.
David, there we go.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great introduction. So I suppose I'll answer your second question first about why those targets. Those are our national targets. It's what the ICB is measured on. Those are the performance areas we've got to achieve. And I think looking down, starting with the positive, I think we're at or over most of our targets. It's if you look at the majority of them, if you look at elective and the continued reduction of the waiting list and where that was a few years ago, mental health and primary care and the GP numbers, we're doing extremely well. I'll probably I'll focus on maybe a couple of areas that aren't doing so well, because I'm sure they're going to come up in questions. The first one is urgent and emergency care, and especially you'll look through and you'll see the performance at the emergency department and the ambulance delays. Now, both of those are really, I suppose they're how we manage those, it's flow through the system. So they're symptomatic of block flow. So with the ambulance handover delays, you're measuring that in minutes. What that is, it's people waiting ultimately for a bed. Now, in response to this, there's been a lot of work on the winter plan. So there was 6,000 more appointments in general practice, additional support in the clinical navigation hub. So that's a virtual service. We're also diverting 999 calls where they're applicable to there. And we are changing the way that ambulances convey, so avoiding ED and moving them directly to the right place. And we've been doing a lot of work going through avoidable EMAS conveyances, so ambulance conveyances, case by case, to understand what could have been done to keep the patient out of hospital. Now that got put in place in October. Unfortunately, what we've seen over Christmas is, I'm sure it hasn't escaped you, we've had extremely high flu demand. That's come in 4 weeks earlier than predicted, and it's continuing now. And that combined with RSV, COVID, and norovirus, it's really keeping our performance not where we'd like it. So that's the situation for urgent and emergency care. I'll also talk about the community paediatric waiting list. So you'll see on the graph there that is the over 52 weeks is high, and it's going up. And that is related to its extremely high demand for neurodevelopmental conditions such as autism and ADHD. That's a national problem. When you look at LLR as benchmark, we look like we're one of the worst in the country, but that is because the way we report the data. So most areas don't report that as a community waiting list. Now, we've decided that actually it's a problem that needs to be tackled really. We could improve the benchmarking by changing the way that's reported, but actually we want to keep that problem there. So there's a lot of work ongoing there, looking at how we do those. The extremely complex pathway, multiple teams and patients requiring ongoing treatments. There is a few things that have been implemented already. So we've changed the staff mix on the ongoing treatment, so that frees up capacity for the new patients. And we're also working with partners upstream, so before patients get in, and helping the patients who are on the waiting list already. So, any questions? Sorry, that was a lot of information all at once.
Okay, Dan, do you want to start off? And I'm going to come back in a bit.
Thank you. Oh, good afternoon, welcome. I hope your first meeting isn't too painful or bruising for you. I can't tell you how many times I've heard about the preparation for the winter programme, and it goes on and on. And I just wonder, who on earth is running these organisations? Because any other business knows what peaks are or emergencies. I mean, if I was to be able to say how many staff are normally in an emergency, what's that common number? How does that work out? And then where's your additional reserve teams ready to come in and meet it? The ambulances are delayed because they're there instead of taking somebody who's in need of help, dropping them off, doing the paperwork quickly, smartly, and being back on the road. Instead, they're just like incubators, got people in the back for 5-10 hours. And it's just to the point, well, what is it all about? How many years do we keep going over the same path, that we have these same horrendous nightmares consistently? Who on earth is at the top of all of this, organising it and trying to sort of make sense of it? Because they know winter brings, you've said it's a month early. Okay, well, I mean, we can't control the weather and what's going to happen, and we don't know where the next virus is coming from. We know all of that. But I just feel that there isn't the sort of thought that they're going to need staff for this. We're going to need an extra, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 staff. You know, where does it all come from? Because it just seems it's the same box, and it doesn't matter who turns up, you have to go through this box system and come out the other end, hopefully, or into a bed. And it's just unbelievable, the chaos. And yet, if you were to look at the executives and the salaries and the cost to the taxpayer of all these brilliant people, and this year, next year, it's the same outcome. So if you keep doing the same thing, looking for a different outcome, you've got real problems. So if you could give me some insight into that, and I would dearly love to know how many staff are normally in emergency and accident department, and what provision that's meaningful and a member of the public could understand. Yeah, we've got standbys, we've got 30 nurses that we're now being able to draw this, do that. Because we're just going to have the same every year. Well, it is the same every year. We talk about it, but there's never a different outcome. Thank you.
So a lot of passion there. So and I think, I'd agree with you. Yeah, I'd agree with you. Every patient who's in an ambulance or waiting long at ED, that's one too many. And that's who we've got to think of at the end of it. I think there's probably three bits to cover on there. So the first thing is, this isn't confined to LLR as a national problem. And you'll see it in the news. It's a problem really of two things. First of all, we've got increased demand. So it used to be that we'd have a quieter summer and then a busier winter. Now it's busy all year round, and the planning's done. The people are put in. I think currently with the high flu demand, it's maybe a bit worse, but not much. But it's the third bit, which is actually really the problem. It isn't the front door, it isn't the accident emergency department, it's we need to get people into beds, and those beds are all full. And a lot of the, there's a lot of problems post-hospital in getting that care and getting the patients out. So it's a combination of, it's a lot more complicated to discharge people now. A lot of work going on there to to improve that, that goes on beneath the surface daily to get people out. But it's really, I suppose, the ED, it's a symptom of the whole system, not the way that I suppose that little bit of it is managed and run.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I thank you for that, but it hasn't given an answer. I did suggest to the Chief Executive some time ago of the hospital trust that why don't they look at what they did with COVID, put like sort of tenting up so you could have 100 beds in there. When you don't need them, you can dismantle it in the summertime. What I'm trying to say is there is no action. What you did say, though, is we put in reserves. And I just thought, oh, right, so how do we quantify that? I'm just trying to be realistic. People talk to me and they're absolutely in utter despair and in a mocking way. And it's horrible because the health service, we've always valued it as being something very special, but it's just not performing when it should perform. It's as simple as that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I suppose the other thing to remember is, we haven't got staff sitting around in reserve, they're doing other things. So when, it's a case of actually what do you stop doing to move them into that urgent care part. And but really you want to keep the focus on keeping the elective weights down, the other things that are going on down. So it's a very difficult juggling act to do.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Betty. David, can I ask you when other people's, just one light on at a time, because otherwise the camera system gets confused. Thank you. Betty.
My daughter is a clinical commissioner in the emergency service, and I see it from her eyes as well. And there is an issue of educating people not to go to the hospital when there's no need to go to the hospital. That's a big thing. People turn up with the smallest of complaints that they shouldn't really be there for. So perhaps it's a wider issue than for the NHS. It's about educating the public. You don't need to go to the hospital if you've got a sore thumb, basically. And I know from her that people turn up where they'd be better off for their own health to stay at home. So I don't know what we could do about that, but you could almost cut it by 50%, I think. Thank you.
Ross.
Yeah, I mean, my question follows on from Betty's as well, actually. How much of an issue do we think people attending services at the wrong level is? Either going to the A&E department when they should be at an urgent care centre or not going to the GP. And as a knock-on effect of that is, what investigations have been done into the efficacy of the 111 service? Because I used to be a big believer in 111, and I thought, they can triage you and send you in the right direction. But my own experience in December was absolutely abysmal. So if you could indulge me for a second, I went blind in my eye in December and I phoned 111. And, really looking back, I should have thought, well, this is an emergency, I'll go to A&E. So I phoned 111 and instead I've gone blind and they said, okay, go to the urgent care centre. So I went to the urgent care centre, they had a little iPad, I put my details, said I've gone blind, and they said, okay, sit and wait for an appointment. I waited and saw a HCA healthcare assistant who took my blood pressure and said, okay, you're not dying, come back for another appointment in 12 hours. So I came back to Loughborough in 12 hours time and saw a paramedic who said, actually, you've gone blind, you need to go to A&E. So I went to A&E. By now it was about 2-3 in the morning, waited hours there and was triaged and said, as I was being triaged, a nurse came up to the nurse that was seeing me and said, injuries is shut for a few hours because we're short-staffed, so no one's going to be admitted for a few hours. So I waited there and the nurse says, well, I don't know what to do now. A doctor then came and saw me and said, well, by the time you're seen, it's going to be 8-9 in the morning. They're just going to send you to the eye clinic. You might as well come back at 9 a.m. and go see the eye clinic. So there's 5 different scenarios where I said I've gone blind, and they should have just said go straight to the emergency eye clinic in the Windsor department. Once I went to the Windsor department, the eye clinic, they were excellent. They saw me the next day for a GA operation. They did a really, really good job. The care I received there was really good. And as a patient, I didn't mind waiting hours in A&E. If you've got an emergency, you've got an emergency. We understand the pressures that are there. But it sort of broke my trust in the 111 system, because before I was a big believer in that. From my experience, it was pretty poor. And when we look at these, I think 111 is mentioned twice in passing in the reports. And I actually spoke to the paramedic, which is the second time I went to the urgent care centre. And I said, oh, it's pretty disappointing, 111. And he said, this happens all the time. He said, we have a small radiography department that's open 9 to 5. And he said, 111 will refer patients for x-rays at 3 in the morning. And he goes, we've told them time and time again, we don't have a radiography department, but these patients turn up here throughout the night expecting to get x-rays. And he was pulling his hair out. So I just thought, you know, have you looked into the 111 system and how it's working?
So first of all, really sorry about that, and I think it's it sounds horrendous. It's so there has been is ongoing looking at all of our services. So I will take that back, your experience, and you know, see if we can see how often that happens. I think we did do a look at how many patients, I suppose, attended multiple times for the same thing, bounced around the system, and it was fairly low a few years ago. I don't know if we've looked at that since. I've not been that close to it, but it would be a, you know, it sounds like it's worth looking at. And I think that specific referral for a service which is closed, that needs to be addressed. So I'll feed that back.
You. I was just about to follow with my own horrific 111 experience about 5 years ago, and I'm not entirely sure. No, well, I'm not entirely sure I can actually trump going blind, but it did involve ambulances not turning up and then being cancelled 2 minutes after the 2-hour the cut-off or whatever it was that had been operating. But yeah, look, I think everyone's experience, I think, of using all the different areas covered by this report, and I you know, it's worth actually talking about the whole report rather than just maybe bits of it. But I think everyone's individual experience and our residents' experiences are, when you come across really good people, really dedicated people, actually they make a huge difference, and they'll, you know, move you along in the right direction. Unfortunately, you know, there are also, because of the size, there are also lots of people who are either not the right people in the right jobs, or maybe you know, be generous and say we maybe come across them on a bad day, and actually it unfortunately it's those experiences that actually live with you, because they're the ones that you really remember. They're the ones that people retell and talk about, and every organization is as strong as its weakest links, and the larger the organization, the more, by default, the more weak links you're potentially going to inherit and develop within any organization. I suspect from your perspective, you know, this data is built from all of those experiences that people have had, and you know, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. Now, Fiona, you had your hand up. Hopefully not a 111 horror story.
No. Hello, my name's Fiona Barber, and I represent Health Watch Leicester and Leicestershire at this committee. I'm not a voting member, but we do have a seat here. Health Watch does have quite a collation of people's experiences with the services, both 111, going direct to A&E, using the out-of-hours services. And we've shared a lot of those reports directly with the relevant people who always say that they will take them on board and look to improve things. But as we know, it's an uphill battle. I'm not going to talk on all the parts that have already been mentioned, but I would like just to highlight the dental activity at primary care level, because as we know, dentistry is a major issue, or should I say NHS dentistry is a major issue. It's one of the main topics that people contact Health Watch locally about. The ability to actually access an appointment and get treatment is very limited here. So this is a rag-rated red in the plan. And it would be really interesting to understand how you're going to prioritise that going forward, as now dental activity is commissioned at regional level for local as opposed to national, so you have the ultimate responsibility. So it's lovely of you to come and face the music on it.
I thought dental activity might come up. It's a very emotive area, and I think it's one that touches everyone, isn't it? It's trying to get an NHS dentist. So what has been happened is it's realised that the price within LLR wasn't high enough to motivate that, especially in certain areas. So the what's called the UDA, units of dental activity, the price of that has gone up to try and incentivise getting patients to work, getting dentists to work in those areas that haven't historically been served. We're also looking at further opportunities on that, and I think it's in its early stages. So it is something that's being worked on. I think with that, it's probably too early to say whether that's had the desired effect. So it's something we're looking at.
Thank you for that. I understand it's at early stages, but the responsibility for commissioning is now locally. And you would like to think that given the narrative is so depressing around dentistry and NHS access, and particularly when you get reports that highlight the dental decay amongst young people is one of the worst locally, is one of the worst in the country. And I think there needs to be a recognition that this is affecting many people and it's leading to negative outcomes. I haven't heard a good dentistry story locally for some considerable period of time. And I think the committee would like to understand that there is being a little bit more positivity in the approach and a little bit more urgency across the piece of dental activity. And I don't know whether the committee and the chair in particular wish to have perhaps another topic on this later on in the year. Thanks.
Dentistry is a regular paper to this meeting. I promise you. It's unfortunately frustrating. I suspect, David, do you want to follow up on that?
So I think it sounds like it's been here a few times, and so I think coming back with a fuller response would be a something we can look and do. I think I probably don't have more to tell you than what's here.
Okay, I am looking at you, and we'll get a slot for that paper that David's just promised on behalf of the ICB. So I look forward to seeing that.
It may have to get a joint.
Okay.
Case, but we might not.
Okay, we'll get a slot and a paper in, whether it comes here or directly to joint, but one way or the other. Okay, Mike, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I'm sort of, committee sort of standing advisor kind of chipping in. Ewan's just blindsided me a bit on that one, because I was going to say, David, to sort of give, if the committee, I've been looking at the indicators thinking which ones kind of worry me, not that I expect you to answer for the sins of the NHS now, but what would we want to drill into. Just a few things leapt out for me. There's a couple of big targets, if you like. A&E you've commented on, and the other one is 62-day waits for cancer. They're showing as green because they're above plan. But then I'm looking about where they're supposed to get to by next month, accepting these figures date back to September and October. And A&E is a classic, isn't it? It's green because it's above plan by 0.4%, but it's supposed to get up to 78% from 56.7 by March. So, and again, I was going to suggest it comes back to here for kind of, well, what's the points on the plan? Is it a plan trajectory that goes like that at the end, in which case, that confidence about what will be achievable then is a one, but maybe that's to go into the joint scrutiny health programme. And similarly, there's a couple in there where I'm kind of, I then can't then work out the points on a plot. So for instance, there's one about total of 9 diagnostic tests, percentage of patients waiting over 6 weeks, it's red because it's on 25%, it should be down at 13. But that was supposed to be achieved by October 24, so I don't know in terms of refreshing that target and setting a trajectory whether there is something alongside that. And the last one was, what was it? I now can't find it. There was something in it. Oh, it was cancer early diagnosis, where there is some data in there. We're supposed to get to 75% by 2028. We're on 51%, and I I know I saw something nationally that said more cancers being diagnosed at an early stage than ever before last week. Again, locally, I'm sort of thinking, all right, there's not RAG rated because it's 2028, but you know, are we where we would want to be at this stage on a trajectory to do it? So I don't know if there's a bit of work maybe which then crops up at joint health scrutiny, just in terms of giving a bit more detail where we are off plan or on plan, what is the plan? And for those which haven't got a plan, can we have one which kind of sets data points?
So I can probably talk a little bit more. I think I'll start with the 9 diagnostic tests. So the main one of those which isn't achieving is audiology. So the other ones are largely at plan. There's a group been established to look at audiology, both for, I think there's one for adults and one for children. So those are being looked at, and it's probably the trajectory of that would be most interesting. For the percentages of cancers diagnosed at stage 1 and stage 2, the information is quite old. It's a new target this year, and we're quite behind with how the data flows. So we haven't got enough points to really put it as a graph at the moment to say, are we on that 3-year trajectory? So that's why I suppose there's less detail on that. I would say as well with that, it's going to be talking about what's happening now and in the future, rather than knowing whether that's been effective, because it's there. 62-day was the other one. So the 62-day, there is an improvement trajectory. They're all challenging targets. It's going to be a challenging target. I wouldn't, from the look of it, it's looking like it's going to achieve, but I think all of them is going to be challenging.
Yeah, I think the sort of the immediate comparator would be really interesting, because if you're a resident in Leicestershire, particularly if you're on the periphery of the Leicestershire area, and your referral gives you a choice to go to an area that actually has a 77% success rate on 62-day cancer identification versus Leicestershire at 50 odd percent, you're going to make a choice about which area you go to. And at the moment, we don't have that data. We don't have that information that residents can see.
So for cancer, I think that benchmarking will be quite hard, because UHL is such a specialist centre. Their numbers would benchmark lower than, I suppose, other areas, because they're getting tertiary referrals and the more complex cancers. So I think that's something we could provide, but it might be a little bit misleading when comparing it. And I think, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. I look, the more information that people have access to, they can make decisions themselves, and as long as it's qualified in the right way to explain what's happening, then people can actually see that as well. But in reality, we are an island surrounded by other areas. There are lots of access points that people use at the moment, particularly where I am in the north. I mean, I'm 50 yards from the boundary of Nottinghamshire, and most of the people around my villages, if an ambulance turns up, they literally get asked the choice, which hospital do you want to go to? It's not automatic that it's LRI. But yeah, again, and the same with the situation in Rutland as well for Peterborough and other access points. So people do already have choices, but at the moment they're probably based on, not necessarily on data, they're based on hearsay or comment from others, which may not always be accurate. Okay, are there any other points or questions that anyone wishes to ask? I think we've probably exhausted the data discussion. Look, I'm really, really grateful to Andy, and I'm also very, very grateful for David. As always, everyone around this table is very, very passionate about treatment and access to treatment that residents have, and particularly about making sure that we actually get back up to a level that gives us comfort that we are providing the best service possible to our residents across the whole of the area, across the whole of the breadth of offer that the NHS provides. Our residents' health is incredibly important to us, as it is to each of us individually, as Ross has well and truly demonstrated. How is your eye now, by the way, Ross? Now you've started the question, I need to actually know. Okay, well, good, excellent. Okay, excellent. Right, yeah, I know precisely the eye clinic that you're talking about in the Windsor building as well. So yeah, very good. Look, thank you very much to the two of you for presenting that paper. Thank you very much for answering the questions. We're now going to move on to item 11, which is noting the work programme of the joint HOSC. The report is as detailed, and it's for taking note. Date of the next meeting, item 12, that is the 5th of March, same room, same time. And item 13, any other items? There are no other items, so I'm going to draw to a close at 3:34 p.m. Thank you very much.